We live in a culture that talks about happiness and success, yet is strangely illiterate when it comes to emotions. From an early age, we learn to avoid feeling pain, fear, and sadness, as if these feelings were signs of weakness. Because of this, we end up numb, ready to accept the norms around us without a second thought. In a world that highlights our shortcomings and pushes us to compete, we're drawn into a way of life that challenges us to live but also holds us back, stripping away our spontaneity and true understanding of our emotions and desires. But do we really need to follow everything we're told? What if, instead of being just a piece in society's puzzle, we could be the puzzle itself, put together in our own unique way? It's curious how we grow up without realizing that we're following invisible rules that shape who we are and who we can become. Have you ever caught yourself wondering if the choices you make are truly yours? Or if they're imposed by the current of social expectations that gradually starts to steer us? The pressure from society is subtle but constant. A breeze that nudges us along the same paths walked by so many before us. Without noticing, we start to adjust our behaviors, values, and even desires to fit into this idea of right, which we often don't even stop to question. After all, it's easier to go with the flow, to feel accepted, and to seek this collective comfort, even if it pulls us away from who we truly are. From early on, we're shaped by a set of unspoken rules, norms that eventually blend into our identity. These invisible rules, dictating how we should think, act, and even feel, begin to influence us before we even have the chance to question them. Imagine a child who, upon crying, hears someone say, "Swallow your tears, be strong," a seemingly harmless phrase, but one that paves the way for other behavioral norms, guiding us on what's acceptable to show, hide, or even feel. Slowly, we learn that there are right and wrong behaviors, and carry these standards through life, often without noticing. And these rules end up impacting our self-esteem and shaping our decisions by conforming to these social expectations, often without understanding where they come from. We suppress our spontaneity and authenticity, questioning our own worth when we feel we're straying from the norm. But how much do these norms really reflect what we truly want and feel? Would we still be ourselves without them? This question leads us to think about one of the main pillars that society teaches us to pursue: constant happiness. We live under a kind of invisible rule that makes us believe the ideal life is one of permanent joy and satisfaction. It seems that feeling sad or frustrated, for example, has become something that must be avoided at all costs. However, this quest for continuous well-being carries a dangerous trap. After all, how can we feel fulfilled if we're constantly avoiding the real and complex emotions that are also part of our human experience? And so, driven by this illusion of constant happiness, we start to push aside important feelings like fear and sadness, treating them as failures or obstacles to be overcome. But is true happiness something that stays uninterrupted, as we're often led to believe? The idea that we must always be happy is, for the most part, a narrative that society sells to us. We live in a culture that puts happiness on a pedestal, as if it were the only desirable emotion and proof that we are on the right path. However, this obsession with a constant state of joy and satisfaction leads us to avoid or mask real emotions, like sadness, fear, and insecurity. Feeling sad, for example, starts to be seen almost as a character flaw, something we need to fix as soon as possible. This demand for constant well-being distances us from the emotional reality that is a natural part of our experience as human beings. Avoiding negative emotions is like sweeping dust under the rug. It may seem effective at first, but the dirt only accumulates. Each time we ignore discomfort or repress fear, we are actually storing up emotional weight that will inevitably resurface at some point in the pursuit of this illusion of happiness. We end up distancing ourselves from authentic experiences and the lessons that more challenging emotions can bring. The truth is that personal growth happens precisely when we face difficulties, not when we pretend they don't exist. This constant pursuit of the bright side and of keeping a smile on our faces leaves us vulnerable to the next dilemma. Why do we avoid discomfort? We live in a society that almost trains us to flee from emotional pain, as if feeling something negative were a threat to our ideal happiness. But does avoiding discomfort really bring us more peace? Or does it ultimately make us prisoners to ever-growing anxiety? Society teaches us from an early age to escape from emotional pain. Don't cry. Be strong. Don't show weakness. Phrases like these echo in our minds when we're facing a difficult moment. We create the idea that discomfort is something to be avoided at all costs, as if facing our anguish were a sign of vulnerability. In reality, this fear of discomfort is so deeply ingrained that we often don't even question why it exists. We learn to wear masks of calm and to avoid what makes us suffer, creating a cycle of avoidance that prevents us from growing emotionally. By avoiding harder emotions like anger, fear, or sadness, we end up developing a feeling of lack of control. By hiding or repressing legitimate feelings, we're actually allowing them to build up and create a heavier load, gradually leading to a growing sense of anxiety. Life becomes a sequence of attempts to avoid any form of frustration. But ironically, the more we try to escape discomfort, the more trapped we feel by it. Not having space to process these emotions ends up distancing us from ourselves, creating a sense of losing control. This difficulty in dealing with complex emotions reveals a deeper problem, known as emotional illiteracy. We live in a society that, while encouraging us to reach goals and be successful, fails to teach us something as basic as identifying and accepting what we feel. While we're taught practical skills like math and grammar, we rarely learn to identify and process our own emotions. This emotional illiteracy leaves us unprepared to face life's ups and downs. Many of us grow up not knowing how to handle complex feelings, like frustration, sadness, or fear. Without this understanding, we tend to label these emotions as wrong or inappropriate, leading us to suppress them instead of expressing them. This lack of emotional literacy pushes us into a cycle of emotional imbalance. When we can't name or understand our feelings, they build up, creating a weight that becomes harder and harder to bear. Imagine someone who never learned to swim suddenly thrown into deep water. That's how many people feel when facing emotionally challenging situations without the tools to handle them. Additionally, this lack of preparation makes us more dependent on external validation. We seek acceptance and approval from others as a way to compensate for our inner insecurity, not realizing that we're, in fact, drifting further from who we truly are. This need for validation and acceptance, so prevalent in our culture, ends up fueling an even deeper disconnect with our true selves, creating a sense of emptiness that feels impossible to fill. All of us have a need to feel accepted and validated, to know that we matter to others and that, in some way, we belong to a group. This search for acceptance is natural and part of the human experience. However, when this need becomes central, we start shaping our lives around what we believe others expect of us. The idea of fitting into social norms leads us to follow standards that often don't reflect who we truly are, but rather who we think we should be to gain acceptance. This behavior is largely driven by the fear of judgment and concern over others' opinions. As a result, we adjust ourselves to external expectations, from our appearance to the way we speak and act, always trying to avoid criticism or disapproval. But the truth is, throughout this process, we lose touch with what we genuinely value. This disconnect creates an inner void that's hard to ignore. No matter how much we seek approval from others, it never seems enough to fill that sense of dissatisfaction. In this relentless pursuit of others' acceptance, we set aside our true passions and desires. We start living an acceptable version of ourselves, creating an identity based on external expectations. And the result is a feeling of disconnection from our own selves, as if we are constantly playing a role to please others. In doing so, we stray further and further from our own wishes, unknowingly falling into the trap of measuring our worth solely by our productivity and the results we deliver. In today's society, productivity is often seen as the ultimate indicator of success and personal value. From a young age, we learn that being productive, that is, completing tasks and producing visible results, is an admirable and essential quality. However, this idea that our value is tied to how much we can produce each day creates constant pressure, making us feel as if we're never doing enough. It's as if we're always competing with time and our own limits, striving to meet goals that often don't even reflect our real desires or values. This obsession with productivity makes every moment of rest or pause echo with an internal voice questioning our worth. Shouldn't I be doing something more important? This feeling disconnects us from our genuine passions and interests, distancing us from the simple act of being. Staying busy becomes a reflection of success, while idleness and free time are seen as a waste. With this mindset, we create a trap for ourselves, where anxiety is fed by the constant need for validation through tangible results. However, this relentless pursuit of productivity can lead to both physical and emotional exhaustion. The more we try to prove our worth through work, the further we stray from our own desires, and paradoxically, the more we intensify the feeling of emptiness. In this context, the idea of a perfect life starts to seem like an unattainable goal, built upon a standard of success that never allows us to stop, breathe, and simply be ourselves. In an era of social media and perfection on display, it's easy to fall into the trap of believing that a perfect life is real and achievable. We are bombarded daily with images and stories showing people seemingly living at the height of happiness, surrounded by success, beauty, and fulfillment. These idealized fragments become our standard for comparison, making us question if we're doing enough or if we're good enough. The pursuit of this perfect life, fueled by a mix of expectation and constant comparison, traps us in a reality where something always seems missing for us to feel whole. The problem is that this illusion of perfection ignores the complexity of human life. Moments of struggle, disappointment, and vulnerability are left out or hidden, creating an unrealistic and distorted image of what it means to live fully. By comparing ourselves to these edited, polished versions of others' reality, we end up creating a feeling of insufficiency within ourselves. It seems that our life is never as good as someone else's, leading us into a cycle of dissatisfaction where we are always trying to fix what, from our perspective, seems wrong with us. This chase for an unattainable ideal keeps us trapped in a constant feeling of inadequacy. Instead of valuing who we truly are and what we have, we get lost in a race to fill a void that can't be filled. This endless comparison limits our ability to live authentically, placing us in a cycle of self-criticism and low self-esteem, as if happiness and success were a universal formula that everyone should follow. Following rigid cultural norms can give us a sense of security and belonging, but it also limits our ability to be authentic. From an early age, we're encouraged to conform to certain behaviors and avoid any actions that might seem strange or out of the ordinary. This pressure to fit in, although subtle, shapes our view of what's acceptable and deprives us of the freedom to explore what truly makes us feel alive. By following these patterns, we end up suppressing creative impulses, and in doing so, distancing ourselves from who we really are. Creativity, by its nature, flourishes when we allow ourselves to explore unconventional paths and express ideas that go beyond the ordinary. However, when we're confined by norms telling us what to think, how to act, or even what to feel, we limit our ability to question and innovate. Conformity, while comfortable, acts like an invisible fence, trapping our creative potential and keeping us away from authentic experiences. Without this freedom, we live more as spectators of ourselves than as protagonists of a life aligned with our passions and desires. Authenticity requires courage to step away from what's expected and to follow a unique path, which often means challenging what makes sense to others. By freeing ourselves from these external expectations, we open up new possibilities and ways of living that genuinely represent who we are. If we keep shaping ourselves according to what others expect, we'll never be able to live a full, truly personal life. Instead of trying to control or suppress emotions like fear, sadness, and uncertainty, we can find genuine freedom by accepting them as integral parts of who we are. Society often teaches us that these feelings should be avoided, as if they were signs of weakness or failure. But what we rarely realize is that by resisting these emotions, we're actually increasing the weight they have on us. Accepting these complex emotions doesn't mean giving in to them. It means allowing them to exist without letting them consume us. When we accept fear, sadness, and uncertainty, we stop wasting so much energy trying to hide or ignore them. This process allows us to see that these emotions aren't our enemies, but rather natural parts of the human experience. We stop fighting against who we are and instead start understanding and respecting ourselves more deeply. This is the first step in building a more meaningful and authentic life, one in which we don't need to follow patterns or pretend to feel a certain way. Embracing our most challenging emotions paves the way to an emotional freedom that few people know. By welcoming our emotions rather than denying them, we gain a clearer view of life and find an inner balance. Ultimately, it's this acceptance that gives us the strength to live in alignment with our own values, letting go of the rules imposed by a society that doesn't always understand the depth of what it means to be truly human, rather than blindly following the rules society imposes. It's liberating to realize that we can replace these external standards with our own values. Living according to personal values requires courage and a good amount of self-awareness. But in doing so, we create a life that's more authentic and fulfilling. In the end, external rules don't always reflect what really matters to us. But following our own values is a way of honoring who we truly are. Defining our personal values is like building a solid foundation upon which we make decisions and carve our path. When we allow our values to guide us, we create a life structure that makes sense to us, regardless of what others expect or think. For instance, if we value honesty, we can find peace in being transparent, even if it makes us seem different in others' eyes. This internal alignment reduces the pressure to conform and enhances our sense of freedom and personal satisfaction. This shift allows us to transform our relationship with the world around us. Instead of simply reacting to what others expect, we begin to act in ways that genuinely feel good to us. Choosing a path based on personal values is an invitation to live more fully, letting go of the rules and expectations that don't serve us. In this way, we trade a life shaped by others for one that reflects our true selves, which, in the end, is the most powerful form of freedom. Living authentically requires the courage to be who we are, even if it means facing critical looks or stepping out of our comfort zone. It's a daily exercise in staying true to our values and desires, but also in cultivating flexibility to handle the adversities and uncertainties that come our way. Authenticity doesn't mean rigidity. On the contrary, it demands an open mind and a willing heart, ready to adapt without losing sight of what's essential. In practice, authenticity can be exercised through small actions. It can be as simple as saying no when something doesn't feel right, or choosing a path that truly resonates with our beliefs. Even if it seems different from what others expect, this practice brings a sense of fulfillment because we know we're living in line with what's true to us. However, flexibility is essential to avoid falling into a version of authenticity that limits us. Sometimes being authentic also means adjusting our course, learning something new, or reevaluating old beliefs. When we balance authenticity with flexibility, we're able to adapt to changes without losing our essence. This allows us to face life with greater ease, knowing that we don't need to follow a single path to find happiness, with each choice based on our values and the willingness to evolve. We're building a richer, more meaningful life, a life that truly represents us. Living authentically is a decision that requires reflection and the courage to question what we've been taught and embrace what genuinely makes us happy. At some point, we've all followed rules and expectations that may have nothing to do with what we truly want, but there's a chance to truly take control of our own lives. To do this, we need to clearly see the rules that limit us and discern what genuinely resonates with us. Letting go of what doesn't bring us joy is liberating, but it's also challenging. Above all, it requires confidence to set our own standards and live in harmony with what really matters, even if it means challenging conventional wisdom. In the end, what matters is that each choice expresses our true selves, not a version shaped to meet others' expectations. Seeking that connection with ourselves and finding the courage to live according to what truly matters is the path to a full and satisfying life. Life is too short to be lived according to what others say is right. Take the power to decide and build a path that truly reflects who you are. Real freedom lies in staying true to yourself, regardless of external pressures. If you've made it to the end, thank you for being here. Talking about questioning norms and seeking authenticity is more than just an idea. It's a path that challenges us and, at the same time, liberates us. Perhaps you too have wondered how many of the choices you've made up until now really came from what you believe, and how many were just attempts to fit in. These questions don't have easy answers, but they're what move us. Being here, sharing these reflections, is like opening a door to what's most true. And if, in some way, this conversation resonated with you, then I invite you to subscribe and be part of this space. Every comment, every like, is an exchange, a way of telling each other that we're in search of something more authentic. Share your story, your questions, or simply your perspective in the comments. I feel like we're creating a space where we can be ourselves, without judgment, where every story matters. In the end, it's in this exchange, in this mutual understanding, that we recognize and support each other.